Hello and welcome to The Point, and I'm Dr. Laura. I'm joined today by my co-host, Richard Kent, and today's going to be a really exciting program. Hi, Richard.
Hi, lovely to be with you again.
We are going to be talking about a really exciting topic, from conception to birth. Now, Richard, this is something that you're very passionate about.
Absolutely.
And we have lots and lots to talk about.
We certainly do.
So I think we better not waste any time. We'll go straight into your fun facts, which is so informative, and then we can come back and discuss more about the whole concept of conception to birth. See you back shortly.
Hello, my name is Richard Kent. I want to talk today about life starting at conception. Now, under British law, life starts at 24 weeks in the womb. However, according to the scriptures, life starts at conception. There's no question about that, and I want to prove that to you from the scriptures. We're told in James chapter 2 that the body without the spirit is dead. And I want to give you 3 illustrations of how the spirit and the body come together to form human life. The first example I want to give you is recorded in Luke chapter 8, where we have a little girl, Jairus' daughter, who was 12 years old, and she was dead. And the disciples called Jesus to come and pray for her, to bring her back to life. So when Jesus came to Jairus' home, Jesus actually said, "She is not dead, she is just sleeping." Now, the crowds all laughed and jeered at Jesus because they knew perfectly well that Jairus' daughter, we don't know her name, that she was dead. However, Jesus took no notice of what they said. He put everybody outside the room except for the mother, the father, Peter, James, and John. And he spoke to the dead body of the little girl and said, "Little girl, arise." And it says her spirit came back into her body and she came back to life. So there's an example of the spirit coming back into the body and a little girl coming to life, because it is the spirit that gives life. Remember I told you in James, the body without the spirit is dead. Let's look at the creation of Adam in Genesis chapter 2. It says, "The Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his spirit the breath of life, and man became a living being." So Jesus Christ formed man, the structure of man, complete, using all his DNA and all his 100 trillion cells, but that body was dead until Jesus Christ breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. Effectively, the spirit of Adam into the dead body of Adam, and Adam came to life. The body without the spirit is dead, but when you breathe a spirit into a dead body, that body comes to life again. Let's look now at the death of Jesus on the cross. The death of Jesus on the cross is described in all 4 Gospels. In one of the Gospels it says Jesus gave up his spirit and he died. Jesus gave up his spirit and he died. In other words, Jesus' spirit left his body and his physical body, died. We know his physical body came back to life again 3 days later at the resurrection. But on the cross, Jesus' spirit left his body and he died. So now let's look at conception. Now at conception, what happens is 23 chromosomes from the dad come together with 23 chromosomes from the mum to make 46 chromosomes, the full complement of chromosomes for the human genome. On that genetic code is encoded all the information for all 100 trillion cells in our bodies. But that is just that's really important, it's totally miraculous, but that single cell would not be alive without an indwelling human spirit, because the body without the spirit is dead. Therefore, that single cell at conception must have an indwelling spirit, otherwise it would be dead, and therefore the spirit must enter at conception. Now, if you think about it, the fact that life starts at conception, not at 24 weeks, and certainly not at 9 months when we are born, has profound implications. For example, we're all 9 months older than we think we are. If you're 24 years old, you're not really 24 years old, you're 24 years, 9 months old. Anyway, what I wanted to do was to make the really important point is that life starts at conception, not at birth and not at 24 weeks, at conception. Our life started at conception. Thanks for listening, and God bless you.
And welcome back to the Point. And that was a fascinating presentation from Richard about conception, the whole process of conception. And we're going to continue, Richard, because that's amazing. And I'd like to start just by asking, would you say that the 9 months is actually the time from conception to birth? And isn't it a miracle, would you say?
Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to start just with conception.
Yeah.
Just with conception. Now, we're going to have to do a whole program just on conception. Because the evolutionists think it all happened in the primordial slime 3.8 billion years ago. Absolute garbage. It's the most complicated thing you can imagine in your life. I think we've just got a picture of one sperm just about to enter the zona pellucida of a human egg. Before we go any further, just remember that the ladies have all the eggs in their ovaries that they will ever have when they were born. As a little baby at 9 months, all the eggs there. In fact, all the eggs there at 12 weeks. But anyway, what actually happens during conception is quite extraordinary, and it's totally miraculous, really. There are actually about 250 million sperms which are present, and there are only 3 days of the month when they can actually get through the neck of the womb, called the cervix, because the cervix is closed there's a hormone called progesterone, and that affects the mucus over the neck of the womb. So there are only 3 days a month when a lady is fertile anyway. But of the 250 million sperms, only about 12 actually make it into the fallopian tube. So perhaps we can look at the next picture. Now you can see the yellow ovary at the bottom there, and once a month, under the influence of various hormones, I'll just mention the names of them, the whole business of conception is organized, if you like, chemically by various hormones: estrogen, progesterone, luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, and chorionic gonadotropin. As I said, we're going to do a whole program on fertilization because it is so complex. But there you see that from the ovary, the long tube called the fallopian tube. And the egg gets released under the influence of the various hormones and is released into the fallopian tube on the right there. And at the same time, of the 250 million sperms, only about 12 make it to the opening of the fallopian tube. And at that point, something really absolutely extraordinary happens, is that the fallopian tube actually grabs hold of the sperms and changes the chemical constituency of these sperms, so that it's called capacitation, is the chemical change. And the actual sperms change their anatomical makeup with a special head called an acrosome. And an acrosome has the correct chemical nature to penetrate the zona pellucida. So if it's convenient, we go back to the first slide again, which is when the sperm actually enters the zona pellucida. So that sperm there has an acrosome at the tip, which is chemically the correct consistency to go through a rather spongy outside of the egg. So it penetrates the zona pellucida, but only one, and it's very important. If two sperms enter the egg, normally the egg will die. But on this occasion, only one enters, and then there's an extraordinary reaction, so that the whole of the egg completely changes its constituency, and the outside becomes hard, so no other sperms can get in. Now that is absolutely extraordinary. It is unbelievably complex, and as I said, we're going to do a whole program on this. So what do you think of that, Laura?
Fascinating, absolutely fascinating, and thank God for the complexity of it all. And it just reminds me of a Psalm 139. And Psalm 139 says, verse 13 and 14 says, "For you did form my inward parts. You did knit me together in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made." And how amazingly fearfully and wonderfully made we are, Richard. Just the complexity of conception is incredible.
It's absolutely incredible. And to go back on my usual theme, irreducible complexity, we all go through a phenomenon of irreducible complexity, because none of us could have been conceived. The sperm and the egg couldn't come together unless extraordinary different events take place, which couldn't possibly have evolved, because it must be perfect. First time, no time to evolve, it must be perfect, otherwise life does not start in the womb. But Laura's just quoted that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. And you may have heard me on other programs talking about something that both Dr. Laura and myself are both very keen on, deoxyribonucleic acid, which is DNA, which is the most complex genetic code in the universe. And remember that as that single cell in the womb, as it comes together, it contains 23 chromosomes from mum, 23 chromosomes from dad, which makes up a full complement of 46 chromosomes, which is a genome, 46 chromosomes, and that has, in its entire geometrical structure, has the genetic information for all of the 100 trillion cells in our bodies. And that is extraordinary in itself. Remember that we have eye cells, heart cells, lung cells, brain cells, bone cells, and all the other cells. But in our eyes, we have all sorts of different cells. We have transparent skin, we have an iris, we have a lens, we have the ciliary muscles, we have the aqueous humor, the vitreous humor, the retina, and the rods and the cones and the optic nerve, and lots more besides. And they're all completely different. So all that genetic information must be all present at conception, right at the very beginning. So this most incredible genetic code, of which God designed, by the way, is too complex for any human to design it. God designed our DNA, which is, by the way, how we're going to be resurrected, because God has got our DNA. We've got our 66, we're made of 66, which is an interesting number. But anyway, we're made of 66 different elements, and God, just because he's got the code, will reconstitute our 66 elements in a supernatural resurrection body. But even this body is supernatural as well. Let's have a look at the next slide. So there we have, after about between 4 or 5 days, somewhere around like that, 4 or 5 days after conception in the fallopian tube, the fertilized egg travels down the fallopian tube into the womb, and the womb has been carefully created as a sort of perfect little place for the egg to implant in the wall of the womb. And so they have an implanted egg in the wall of the womb, and over the next 12 weeks, something absolutely extraordinary happens. Is the little cells divide, and that first of all you have, they call in the textbooks, a primitive heart and a primitive brain and a primitive buds for the arms and the legs and the genitalia. But let me tell you, there's absolutely nothing primitive about them. They are all highly, highly complex, highly differentiated cells, totally supernatural. And at about 5 weeks, the little implanted baby in the womb is about the size of a grain of sand. Tiny, tiny, tiny. And when we're about 12 weeks, we're about 5 centimetres. Yeah, we're about 5 centimetres. And there, Laura, we have an umbilical cord. So over to our resident practicing GP to tell us what the umbilical cord is for.
Well, the umbilical cord is a pipeline, isn't it? And
Yes.
it's a pipeline, it's a two-way pipeline.
Absolutely.
Because this connects the baby to the mother's nutrients, and so it transports, it's obviously it's the cord, and it transports nutrients from mum to baby, because there's no other way baby's going to get nourished except through this umbilical cord. And of course, so it transports nutrients, transports oxygen, because baby can't grow, baby will die without oxygen. How does oxygen get there? Baby's not breathing. It has to come through the umbilical cord. So the umbilical cord serves to transport nutrients, to transport oxygen. It transports other things like antibodies across to the baby as well, to protect the baby from any bugs. But it also acts to take away the waste products, because remember, the baby is, baby's growing, baby is breathing, baby's needing to actually grow. And the only way baby's going to grow is if it gets nutrients, but it's also got to get rid of waste products as well. So carbon dioxide comes out, and all the other waste products come out through the umbilical cord as well. So it's a two-way organ, and without it, baby will not grow, baby would actually die. And sometimes this is what can happen. There's a condition called abruption, where the placenta pulls away from the mum's womb due to trauma or some other reason, when it's not positioned correctly. And this can cause bleeding and eventually the loss of the baby. So a very important organ is the umbilical cord. And they use it in modern day these days. They draw things out of it. They actually do a lot of research. And in fact, when a woman goes into a hospital to have the baby now, she will be asked, can we take your umbilical cord? Can we take the placenta? Because we need to do research and all sorts of things. And they have to have the woman's consent to carry this out. So very important a role. And so we're moving from conception, and baby's growing now, and then coming to a baby that's fully formed, Richard.
Yes. I can't remember where we got to on the pictures. Perhaps we can have another look at another picture. Always easier. Pictures are worth 1,000 words. So, well, there we have a baby in the womb. And you made the point. Now, I haven't done medicine for 20 years, so I'm going to ask you, Laura, to tell me. I read just recently that at 28 weeks, about 90% of babies, that little baby is 28 weeks, will survive in an incubator. Now, of course, the uterus, the mum's womb, is a much better incubator than the one in the hospital. But what do you think, Laura? Can a baby survive? What percentage of babies will survive?
I think you're absolutely right, actually. And that's even when I was a paediatric SHO, a junior doctor, we're talking way in the early 90s that I did paediatrics. We had babies at 28 weeks. Even back then, that's how many, 30 years ago, something like that, whatever. Even back then, we had babies as young as 28 weeks surviving, and sometimes even 24 weeks.
Yes.
And so it's just incredible how God has given us such insight into how the baby grows in the mother's womb, and what nutrients, what things are needed to sustain that baby if, unfortunately, baby has to be born before full maturity at 40 weeks. And yes, a great number, 90% of patients will survive at 28 weeks. Isn't that amazing?
And of course that has profound implications that life starts at conception, and further profound implications that at 28 weeks out of the 40 weeks gestation, at 28 weeks, about 90% will survive outside the human body, but in an incubator. That has profound implications when you think about it. So let's move to the next picture. Well, there we have the umbilical cord again, and Dr. Laura's already been talking about that, how that has to be clamped. Because before baby is born, as Dr. has already said, baby was totally dependent on sustenance from mum, but now is able to live independently. Something which you probably are aware of and need to think about it much more seriously is that in our womb, of course, we actually are swimming around in water, or not water actually, in fluid. And so something dramatic happened to the lungs and the heart at birth. In fact, the whole fetal circulation is completely changed at birth, and that is another complete miracle. How we have a little valves which open and shut in the called a ductus arteriosus between the aorta and the heart, so that the blood can circulate correctly, and another valve within the heart to make the circulation within the heart change. Now that is all happens in all of us. Occasionally it doesn't happen. You may have heard of a condition called patent ductus arteriosus. Maybe you'd like to comment on a patent ductus arteriosus, if you can remember about that.
It used to be called hole in the heart as well.
Yeah,
that's
sure.
a sort of layman's way. And of course, the oxygen and the circulation, they're getting deoxygenated blood rather than oxygenated blood, and it causes them not to grow properly, because obviously you need oxygenated blood going through the aorta into the rest of the body, including the brain and the rest of the tissues, to grow. It's a very simple operation to correct these days. Back in the, back 30, 40 years ago, a child who had PDA or hole in the heart would very likely not survive. But now, piece of cake. Again, thanks to research and modern medicine, and God allowing us the insight into the mechanisms of how things work. And there's some patients I know who've had corrections of PDA. They might have a little murmur, but they might have absolutely nothing. And all you know that they've had an operation in the heart is there might be a little scar, or you might see in their notes that they might have had an operation. So modern technology, making use of God's creation and what He has shown us to keep people alive.
So thanks, Laura. That's really helpful to be kept up to date with PDAs. Patent ductus arteriosus is commonly called hole in the heart. But from what we've shown you, the whole business of birth, conception to birth, is totally supernatural. Everything is there right at the very beginning of conception, and conception itself is totally miraculous. I get really cross with the evolutionists. They're complete idiots, as far as I'm concerned, to think that this all evolved in the primordial slime. Life evolved in the primordial slime is absolute garbage. This is highly, highly complex, involving lots of different hormones, lots of different anatomical changes, lots of biochemical changes, lots of electrical changes, all sorts of extraordinary things going on, highly complex, including the genetic code, DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, which is the most complex genetic code in the universe. And God created this, the genetic code, so that our human bodies could be made out of 66 elements, so that we end up as we are now, born at 9 months. Remember, you are actually 9 months older. There we are. There's a little baby aged 9 months, and it's a miracle to go from a tiny little one-cell fertilized cell to that baby in 9 months. The amount of differentiating of cells within that body is truly astounding. But Scripture also has a lot to tell us about it, doesn't it?
Absolutely. God is amazing. I mean, there's a verse here from Luke 1:43 when Mary and Elizabeth met, and Elizabeth spoke to Mary, and this is Luke 1:43, and it says, and this is what she said: "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. But why is this granted unto me, that the mother of my Lord should come to me?" This was when Jesus was only about 4 weeks old, at most, when Elizabeth was describing Jesus as my Lord. Wow. Amazing.
It is amazing. Well, we need to maybe go into the history a bit of that.
Yeah.
John the Baptist was born about 6 months before Jesus Christ. And John the Baptist was, of course, a supernatural birth, because Elizabeth was elderly, well beyond her menopause. And 6 months later, 6 months later, Gabriel again appeared, but this time to Mary, who was probably a teenager, we're not sure, but probably a teenager, and told her that she would become pregnant by the Holy Spirit. So she did become pregnant by the Holy Spirit, and she was betrothed to Joseph, her husband, but they weren't married yet. And of course, in that particular culture, sex outside marriage was punishable by stoning to death. So not surprisingly, Mary was terrified for a whole lot of reasons. For one thing, she thought she might be stoned to death. So her obvious, what she would do is to go to the only other person who could possibly understand her cousin Elizabeth, because she too had had a supernatural conception. So I think we've got a picture of Mary and Elizabeth meeting each other, and as Laura just read, Elizabeth exclaims, and she's elderly, much older than that picture, "How blessed am I that the mother of my Lord should visit me." Now, my Lord being Jesus Christ, probably, as Laura said, about 4 weeks old. In fact, Elizabeth said "my Lord" at 4 weeks, but could easily have said that at conception, because truly, Jesus Christ was a real person in the same way as you and I are real people at conception. So back to you, Laura.
Absolutely. So you've really explained the fact that conception is where life begins.
Yes.
And it's debatable because a lot of people don't believe that. But I hope we've convinced you through to the point that it is the way God has designed things to be. Without conception, without process of conception, none of us would be here today. You in front of the cameras, Luke behind the cameras, people in the audience. You know, we would not be here without the process of conception. And it is our strong belief that conception starts exactly, and that's where life starts. God knitted us together in our mother's wombs. And even as Jesus, Elizabeth recognized that even when Jesus was smaller than the size of a tadpole, he was recognized as having as a person, as being the Lord. And just as God recognizes us, even when we are twinkles in our Father's eyes, that we are who God has made us and what His future for us is, and that we are uniquely and fearfully and wonderfully made. And that we should value that. We should value our lives. We should also value the lives of other people, because God has taken so much care into forming who we are, and we are so unique. And Richard, even identical twins, you know, it's amazing. I'm fascinated, right, by this, these twins on YouTube now. They're so identical, but their personalities are completely different. So you've been watching To The Point today, and basically we're so thrilled to bring you this program all the time. We'll continue to do so. Get in touch with social media, Facebook, and remember you can email us on tothepoint@revelationtv.com. God bless you and see you again soon.